I believe wholeheartedly that it's kind of difficult to be the church and not be involved in community. Churches that are inwardly focused, and that those are the churches which often have a decline. I'm a native of Greenwood, South Carolina, born and raised, as I always tell people, in the metropolis of Greenwood, South Carolina. Grew up there on the west side of town. My family, born and raised there. My grandparents were born on that side of town. And I grew up there in a church called Macedonia Baptist Church, my home church. And I actually spent about 4 years pastoring my home church, which is Macedonia, prior to coming here. I grew up there under the leadership of my pastor and great mentor to me, the Reverend Dr. Willie S. Harrison. And as far as ministry, he was a staple in the community. He was one who really mobilized resources in the community to do ministry. And that's kind of the motto of ministry that I use even today. So I'm thankful for his mentorship down through the years. He's 88 years old now, but still holds a dear place in my heart. This is what I always tell people about my call to ministry. I really cannot remember a moment in my life that I did not know that I was going to be a preacher. I've always known it. But I'll tell you what began to happen, I guess, with my acknowledgement of my call to ministry. In my mind, I had this idea that I had to find something else to do outside of ministry to really be able to sustain myself and to live. And so I went to school. I majored in chemistry. I was a chemistry major with the intentions of being a pharmacist. Did that with the idea that, being a pharmacist, that I would still have time for ministry, that I could do both things. Well, long story short, I ended up working at a pharmacy in Greenwood at Rite Aid, or Eckerd at that time. Worked there on the weekends, worked 12-hour days while I was in college, majoring in chemistry. And I found that being a pharmacist, it would not have been my personality, because I'm too much of a people's person to literally sit behind a desk and count pills all day. I did want to change my major, so I kept majoring in chemistry, graduated Lander, did some research for NASA during that time, left and went to grad school to Clemson to get a PhD in chemistry. Well, in between me graduating and going to grad school, I accepted my call to ministry, and I was torn. I really wanted to go to seminary school at that time, but in the smallness of my mind, I guess I should say, I didn't think it was possible, because I didn't think I was going to be able to sustain myself. I went to school at Clemson, get a PhD, and during that time while working on my PhD, I actually enrolled in seminary school at Gardner-Webb University, which is in North Carolina. So I would literally go to the lab at Clemson in the morning, start my experiments. I wake up at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning to go, and I would drive to North Carolina to Gardner-Webb to go to seminary school, stay there all day, and then at the end of the day I would come back to the lab and work up my chemical reactions. Graduated from Clemson, later graduated from Gardner-Webb, and the rest is history.
I went to seminary. I don't know that I've met anybody else that's got an MDiv and a PhD in chemistry. Have you run into any other in your fellowships?
Well, actually, I think I know one other person. I can't remember his name. We met quite a while ago. Actually pastors in Virginia. I think he has a PhD in chemical engineering, and he went to seminary school. But it's a very rare thing to be involved in the sciences altogether, and also in ministry.
How has that helped or shaped your view of faith, knowing being a person of science as well?
Actually, when I was going to seminary school and the entrance essay that needed to be written, it actually shaped my perspective of who God is and how God is involved in science. Because there are so many people that will say, oh, well, science and religion don't mix. But that's the exact opposite of what I believe. I believe wholeheartedly that science is God unveiling himself. It's unveiling the mysteries of God. It's really shaped my ministry because being a scientist, I learned to be very analytical, and it's been a tremendous blessing. I believe not only to me, but also to the places where I've served in ministry. I believe me having been exposed to other areas, academic areas, have caused me to expose others in ministry to other areas to where I believe they can also flourish and be a blessing to the ministry as well.
And you keep a hand in it because you teach at Anderson University.
Yes, so currently what I do, obviously I'm full-time pastor here at Welfare, but I also like to keep my foot in the door in the world of academia. I think that's vitally important, not only just for my own personal development, but I just think it's important because it keeps me exposed to youthful thinking, to other areas of technology that sometimes the church may not be privy to. So I think that working in part-time in academics or education keeps me on the cutting edge. So I think that's vital. So Welfare Baptist Church, here we have three pillars that we really try to focus on here at Welfare. So everything that we do is surrounded or built upon three pillars. And those three pillars are evangelism. Of course, we are a church, so that's our number one focus. We always want to, everything that we do, we want it to be geared toward bringing people to Christ, making disciples of men and women in our world today. But also, I believe that it is vitally important to educate people. You can't really be a disciple if you're not willing to learn of Jesus Christ. And so we have evangelism and then education. And as a part of education, our focus is both on Christian education as well as secular education. And the reason for that is education is a way to economic empowerment. Those are the pillars that our church stands on, and the ministry as we try to flourish during these transitioning times of the 21st century.
Yeah, these cultural shifts now. What are the big challenges, both for you as a pastor and for churches during this time? I mean, what challenges do they face now that they may not have faced in years gone by?
Well, first I'll say this. When we think about the Bible and we think about the Christian church, or even when we think about the Hebrew scriptures, the reason that there is a biblical canon that exists is because of crisis. Had there not been a crisis, there would be no Bible. There would be no written canon that we use as our sacred scriptures today. And so I use that as a premise because I believe that anytime there is a crisis, that a crisis demands a response.
Not only did it get up on Calvary, but it got up in me. That's why I've got clapping in my hands. That's why I've got stomping in my feet.
And so as we think about where we are, the challenging times of the 21st century, it is imperative, it is critically crucial that the church would begin to live up to the challenge of the crisis that is at hand. And so when we think about where we are, when we think about injustices in our community, of the justice system, when we think about injustices and with healthcare disparities in the world of economics, I believe, again, and there are other areas that there are injustices, but I believe, naming a few, that the church must respond. None of us have pastored. We've never served during a pandemic. So there is a crisis within the crisis. There's the crisis of the pandemic, but then there's a crisis for the church not necessarily knowing how to navigate and how to respond during these times. And so that in and of itself is a challenge. And I'll be very practical or very specific about a challenge that we've had here at Welfare, is how are we going to hold the faith community together during this time? Because we are accustomed to being together inside of the sanctuary. And one such way we've done this, and pretty much everybody's doing this all around the country, of course, is through social media. But we've still gathered, of course, not in the sanctuary, but we've gathered on the parking lot of our church having what we call drive-in or drive-up services. I think that it has also conditioned our people to think outside of the box, to know that God can actually move outside of the ordinary, that God can do something beyond the box that many of us have placed him in. And many people have placed God inside of the box called the sanctuary. And so now we're beginning to see God move outside of the sanctuary. Well, I see this as a move forward. You know, everybody's not involved in the community, but we've definitely moved from the sanctuary to outside of the sanctuary. So this is a step in the right direction, moving toward community involvement.
There seem to be a lot of young pastors, and not only the African American community, but community at large that seem to be sharing your vision. Now you're talking about you're working with Austin Carty over at Boulevard, Josh Hunt at First Baptist, people who sort of share these visions for community. Do you think that's going to be a real way to move things forward a little faster than maybe in Gone?
I want to say this first because I guess my involvement with Austin, who's been a great friend, and also with Josh Hunt, those things have been recent developments. So I kind of have to start with the individuals that I've worked with in ACMO, in the Anderson County Ministers Organization, which is a predominantly African American ministerial organization. So I have to start there with the movement and the process, or the progress rather, and the things that we've talked about and discussed there. But I believe that our relationships there are solid, and as a result of us being solid and standing in solidarity, that other relationships have been born out of that. So I guess really what I'm saying is that if there is really going to be progress, if we're really going to move towards something, is that our community must stand in solidarity together across denominational lines, across color lines, because if there are no allies in the fight, we can't get anywhere. When we start to think about all of the wars that have taken place throughout throughout the course of history, had there been no allies, there would have been no progress. And so I like to think about what the fight that we're fighting, that the times that we're in. There's a famous Chinese book called The Art of War. And when we put that when we look at it from a theological lens or theological perspective, not that we're actually fighting and warring against each other, allies are needed. And there's an art to this fight that must be fought. And so one such art is the use of allies. I really, really love community work. I love working in the community. I like to see the impact that ministry has on the community. And the reason why that's so important to me is because I believe wholeheartedly that the church is the central nervous system of the community. And so if the church is really going to be the church, it must stand, it must be the leader in the community that God has called the church to be. It must really stand on the rock and be the church.
What if, do you have a favorite Bible passage or verse?
Yeah, so I think my favorite passage of scripture is found in the book of James, which says, "Count it all joy." And the reason that's a favorite of mine, I think it's developed over the years. I think that when it became my favorite passage of scripture, I don't think I realized that I was going to have to live it, actually have to live through what that passage of scripture means. I believe wholeheartedly that those of us who are really prophets of the Lord, that those of us who are on the side of God, that there will be times in life where we will have to suffer. And really what James is saying in that passage of scripture, that even when you find yourself suffering oppression, suffering however, that you can still count it joy.